guys, welcome back. Zen Cop, aka Mac Rollins, here with you today. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for being here. As usual, like, subscribe, comment if you feel the need. It is a Monday. It is not a Sunday, which is my usual sort of podcast drop type stuff. And I wanted to just sort of say thanks. I really like how things are going. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I just feel like things are moving. I'm kind of finally getting into my groove in terms of content and just being able to be somewhat consistent, which has been a little challenging to say the least. So thanks for your guys' patience in the meantime. And I am getting emails, I'm getting inquiries, which is awesome. So thank you for sharing if you are. I really appreciate that. And yeah, looking to continue to grow and expand here. So today I wanted to talk about a couple of things, but mainly I wanted to touch on law enforcement, past, present, future, right? So we have all these different events that have sort of grabbed the attention of the public and the media, and those major milestone events, we can all go back and reference them over time, but it's important to understand how the reformations became sort of a major and intricate part of law enforcement's growth. And in the grand scheme of things, you know, the law enforcement entities within this nation are not that old. The executive branch of government was ultimately designed to instill law and order among society, right? It was designed to preserve public peace and to ensure those who disrupted that peace were held accountable, in so many words. And that societal endeavor began in the 1800s, and eventually we saw law enforcement entities in cities and counties nationwide. And as time went on, we would see a variety of law enforcement agencies plant their roots in many cities and counties that officially incorporated in or around the 1850s. That was kind of the big boom. And at one point, shortly thereafter, there was almost too much law and not enough order. And there would be sheriff's offices, marshal's offices, police departments, bounty hunters, bondsmen, constable, all sharing some portion of jurisdiction or legal authority that would sometimes overcrowd their overall objective. And more times than not, the main source of any issue seemed to circulate around one thing, and that one thing was money. In that regard, I don't think much has changed. But with money, however, comes greed, and greed is a byproduct of corruption. Now, corruption would manage to keep its presence in the world of law enforcement for decades, and it does still exist today. But we would see major paradigm shifts in the 1920s, the 1950s, and a big one in the 60s. And after the overhaul of the NYPD in the 60s, we saw high levels of internal corruption becoming less and less common. Now, it did, however, still exist as time went on, but more so in intermittent spurts, like what you saw with LAPD, the Rampart scandal, and NYPD's 75th precinct. Like, there's all these sort of small incidents that were isolated, but they're from a specific station or unit. And they very rarely involved an entire agency, like we saw with the Knapp Commission, that involved many individuals and in varying degrees of administration and also political offices. So that level of organizational corruption, however, is more than likely gone for good. But I would also say it's probably harder to get away with these days in the realm of technology and other things. But it's important to remember that corruption, it needs two things in order to be successful. It needs opportunity and a lack of supervision. And to better understand how we have evolved as a career field, we need to first identify the Reformation timeline and look at how we've grown over the years. Now, if you didn't know this already, there were pretty much three stages of strategic policing eras within the U.S. And the first was referred to as the political era. That era began in the mid 1800s and lasted up until about the 1920s. Now, the political era was focusing on political ties to policing. And in so many words, it was taking care of certain tasks or issues to appease politicians. And the second stage is called the Reform era. And the Reform era was a proactive Reformation process because of the pre-existing political era. That whole sort of shift was simply because of the existence of the previous era. Now, its objective was to move policing completely away from political ties and focus on exposing corruption overall. Now, that era thrived from the 20s well into the 1970s, and there were major milestones in terms of success for that era, but there was also a very high level of corruption that was identified along the way. And many of those cases would expose internal illegal activity at very high levels, which included local government offices. And lastly, and most recently, we have our current era, which we are living as reality, and that is the era of community policing and problem solving. This has been proven to be the most effective form of policing to date. It's not perfect, but if we were to create a visible graph or pie chart on a timeline alone, we would see a very low corruption rate and a very high success rate, even with the pitfalls we've experienced over the last decade. But the numbers, while they've drastically improved for corruption and overall good standing among society, I would caution that that statistic's future with respect to the current climate of law enforcement, specifically for future applicants. Now, almost 4 years ago, some of the larger agencies in California would receive thousands and thousands of applications for an academy seat. And out of those thousands of applicants, the list will be narrowed down to hundreds, with a graduating class of much, much less. And even during the recession of 2008, academies in California were still full with students who would be willing to pay their own tuition as a non-employee just to graduate. Now, that was huge. And in the grand scheme of things, it was extremely competitive. That job market in itself was extremely competitive. And it was with people who would apply oftentimes more than once if they really wanted that job. And that's that buzzword, right? Wanted. They really wanted that job. And for anyone who's in this career field, you know that it is not something that is obtained easily. The process to become a cop is extremely difficult, and the road to get there is generally paved with sharp and sometimes very rigorous stones. However, as we have seen over the last few years, that rigorous stone has become more of a smooth asphalt, and it is much, much easier to navigate. Why, do you ask? In a sentence, nobody wants to be a cop anymore, so we are forced to lower the bar and make the road easier to meet the needs and accommodations of new applicants who are far less qualified than what we have seen in years past. Now, the important thing to remember is why the bar was high, and why the stones on the road were there in the first place. Now, they were there to get rid of the ones who couldn't hack it and to weed out the people who had no business being in law enforcement. Now, these people, the ones who initially wouldn't have made it, they're the top candidates in the running right now because all of the other applicants with a brain in their head decided to do something else with their life, and it was as far away from being a cop as possible. Now, overall, the number of applicants has drastically plummeted nationwide. For the first time in California's history, law enforcement academy classes are seeing empty seats. I want to be clear when I say that. That has never, ever happened before in the history of California law enforcement. To say there needs to be cause for concern in that regard would be the understatement of the millennium. Now, this begs the question, how do we get future cops into those empty seats? And the better or more appropriate question, in my opinion, is why are the seats empty to begin with? And while I do believe that, the question of how do we get future cops in, it's a good question. It's relevant and it needs to be addressed, but that question is based on an incentive and not based on self-worth or motivation, right? Law enforcement is not a corporation based on earnings and financial growth. Some would make the argument for the financial aspect. I get it. You got to spend money to make money. However, it's a paramilitary branch of government that needs to retain some type of stability in that regard, and to remain, I guess, void of any tangible goals based on financial incentives, or does it? Are we at a point now where that is changing? And over the last year or two, I have seen more and more law enforcement agencies advertising some type of hiring bonus or incentive. And some agencies started out with, dollar amounts within the $10,000 range, and they were contingent with some type of contract. It wasn't a lump sum. The payment was partially added to your paycheck over the course of 5 years, blah, blah. But then I started to notice that there were agencies offering relocation incentives along with a hiring bonus. Some Southern California agencies were willing to pay a lot of money to get you to relocate, and even go farther. They would offer to pay a percentage of your mortgage on your new home. Some were helping with down payments. Some were literally helping you pay your mortgage every month. But the main issue with places like Southern California and also the Bay Area is there's nowhere a cop can live on their salary within a 100-mile radius. And for those that do work in those areas, most of them either commute or they find a small rental property, split it with coworkers, whatever. The bottom line, the cost of housing is astronomical in certain parts of California. And conveniently enough, that's also where the highest crime rates are. So it was becoming extremely apparent that agencies were hurting for employees and very, very badly. And when I started to dig a little bit deeper, I saw that the higher the incentives, the more the agency was suffering. And the more that they had to put up financially to grab the attention of a future employee, the more I saw how horrific the conditions were. And I started talking to friends who worked for agencies that were currently offering some type of bonus or incentive. And after I started talking to more and more of them, specifically the ones in the Bay Area, the most common phrase I heard was, dude, we just don't have enough bodies. We don't have bodies. And then I would hear about a lot of internal issues, problems with political pushback, the defunding movement, vaccine mandates was a huge one, restricting cops' abilities to essentially do their jobs because they wanted to appease radical justice groups, city council, the list goes on. But the bottom line, people were leaving in droves because their agency chose to appease public opinion rather than the livelihood and the safety of their own employees. And the result? Well, they're now having to spend money that they don't have just to get a body in a patrol car. And the highest hiring pay incentive, whatever you want to call it, I have heard of thus far was from the Alameda Police Department. Now, Alameda is located in it's Northern California, but the city has a population of approximately 76,000 people, and the city sits just west of Oakland, right on the San Francisco Bay. Beautiful area if you haven't been. And the payment breakdown was essentially $25,000 upon your hiring. So basically a signing bonus of $25,000 and a $55,000 bonus paid upon completion of their FTO program, field training program. That's a $75,000 hiring incentive. And I understand that there are possible, contractual things there and other things attached to that money. But for purposes of this, podcast speaking point, I wanted to concentrate on the lump sum. At this time, that is the highest paid hiring incentive for law enforcement in the entire nation. Keep that in mind for a city that has a population of 76,000 people. Now, some would make the argument, and hey, I agree, that sounds great. $75,000 is a lot of money, and it would be awesome to get it. But before taking that money, I would encourage you to talk to the employees who currently work there and see what kind of a price tag comes with that money, right? The quote unquote fine print, if you will. And remember that nothing is ever free, especially in the realm of politics, government, all of that. Nothing is free. Talk to the employees who are 10 to 15 years on the job at that agency. Don't talk to the boots. Don't talk to the new guys. They don't know anything different, and they may or may not in time, but I would completely just write off their opinion because they're just so happy to have a job. Fine. I would also avoid talking to the brass, who are 1 foot out to the door. Talk to the cops, talk to the slick sleeve vets, or the supervisors who don't wear bars. Talk to the ones who were at that agency when things were great and who are still there even though things are bad. And you may expose yourself to some negative people in that venture, but in the mix, you will find the ones who can give you some true insight into why their agency needs to throw money at recruits and laterals simply to just stay afloat. And in the end, you'll probably discover that getting a job where you get no hiring bonus or incentive at all, that's probably exactly what you're looking for. Now, a word of warning to those who are in admin or wear bars, and another word of warning to the rest of you who are willing to put forth the work and effort to prevent your agency from going down the road to ruin. Every agency in the nation right now is on the verge of losing control, and everyone is faced with some type of challenge regarding employee retention. And as a result, control is or will soon be lost. And it's not a matter of physically controlling the community. It's a matter of having control and within your agency. And as soon as that tether is cut and you're in orbit, it's so hard to come back from that. And all of these agencies who are writing these checks, there's going to be a cost, a literal and a cost that will affect the community. It'll affect employee. It'll have a ripple effect that we can't even really imagine yet, because this is the first time this has happened. There's no reference point to the past where we can go, hey, what happened when they did this? Because it hasn't happened. This is the first time. And if your agency does not require any type of hiring incentive to get quality applicants, great. Keep it that way as long as you possibly can, if not forever. Your agency should be able to sell itself, right? I mean, it should be able to. Not perfectly, because we would all be lying if we said, oh, this place is perfect. That's not true. It doesn't exist, right? But to say that, yeah, I love where I work, I feel supported, I would honestly, yeah, man, apply here. This is going to be great. You're going to love it. You don't hear that very often. And the worse things get, the harder it's going to be for your agency to recover, right? But the number one way, right? The number one way that your agency will be able to sell itself is from your employees, right? Your current employees are everything. You need them way more than they need you. And sadly, many agencies think otherwise. They think, oh, we're better off without you. We don't need you. You're replaceable. Everyone's replaceable, but the quality of the candidate that replaces you, that's an argument worth having. And if you want to sustain any form of control over the next several years, it is imperative that the agency takes care of its employees. And if you don't, you will lose quality cops, and your replacements, they're going to be walking, talking lawsuits, and eventually you will be forced to spend money on hiring incentives and the like, only to think that you simply could have addressed some of the small things along the way and you could have kept the good ones. So I think that where we're going, the road we are going down as a whole for law enforcement, it's going to get weird. It already is, but I think it's going to get even weirder. I don't know if that's possible, but like I said, there is not a single point in time where we can go back and say, this happened this way. No, there's too much new stuff going on that just makes it a lot more dismal, unfortunately. But the technology that comes with it, there's just so much that makes this particular era, which I think we might be on the verge of changing again, but not for a while, but I think it's coming. That in itself is going to speak volumes to see where we will be in 5, 10, 15, 50 years. But anyway, guys, that's it for me. I will be back next week. Thank you for tuning in and listening. You can follow me on Instagram at the Zen Cop. I'm on Twitter, but I don't really tweet. And if you're listening now, this is, of course, on YouTube. Don't forget to please like and subscribe. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll talk to you again next week.